Hi, I went to the cinema this weekend and saw Evil Dead Rise, the fifth in the long-running horror franchise originally created by Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, and Robert Tapert. Following on from Raimi's original trilogy of the Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness, we had, in I think 2010, Evil Dead, No The, which was a loose remake of the original movie. It's since spun off into a TV series, Ash vs. Evil Dead, in which Campbell's character from the original three movies returns, older but not wiser, and still battling deadites and demonic forces alongside a new young cast. Evil Dead Rise very loosely connects to Ash vs. Evil Dead, but is very much its own film. And after a brief prologue, we meet a family living in a rundown apartment buildings in some unnamed American city. Their father has long since has left home relatively recently, leaving two teenage children and one young child, and the mother's rock groupie, although she says that she's a guitar technician rather than simply being someone supporting the band, comes to visit just as an earthquake racks the building, and two of the children find an entrance to an old bank vault in the cellar, inside of which are artifacts which gradually unleash evil demonic powers which possess the mother and threaten everyone else. And thus the film opens the door to a tidal wave of gore. The previous films have a reputation for being extremely bloody and graphic. The first Evil Dead film was, in fact, prosecuted for obscenity in the UK, so that Mary Whitehouse was pitted against the future director of the Spider-Man trilogy in court and was banned for 4 years. It was only released in cinemas in, I think, about 2008, when I saw it during its very brief and very select run. I've seen all the other films in the series, and they are rather variable. The second film, I thought, leans very heavily into humour and, as the director describes it, slapstick, but with blood and guts instead of custard pies. Army of Darkness is more of a fantasy adventure with some surprisingly violent elements, whilst the remake pulled it back to being a more serious horror film. This, again, is trying to be a serious picture, but it rarely works. A major issue, I think, is that for all the monstrousness of the Deadites as they possess various characters and inflict brutal violence on the others, they're never really evil enough. There's a sense that they are trying to swallow their victims' souls, but they never really get under their skin. They could play on their insecurities, their fears, much more acutely than we see. One of the teenagers is non-binary, and I felt that were one to pursue that line, it could be used as a way of attacking him, by emphasizing the lack of support that he might get from elements of society. The Deadites could embody the intolerance and violence that they might experience. Instead, it's all very vague and brutal and graphic, but never psychologically engaging. And because the characters are so weakly and sketchily drawn, I found myself getting bored very quickly. It's the only major studio film I think I've ever seen where I didn't recognize a single member of the cast by name or by credits. Most of them are Australian, and the film was shot in New Zealand during the pandemic, then be undertaking post-production in Ireland, the native land of writer-director Lee Cronin. Overall, it's visually quite interesting. It has the sense to keep everything tightly contained in a small space over a short period of time to accentuate the tension, but it's never able to do anything to really grab you, to really engage you, to really make you care about what's happening. And it doesn't bother with any of the comedy that previous installments have pushed with. As a result, I found it to be surprisingly padded, boring, and unengaging. And although I've only seen about half a dozen films so far this year, this is quite comfortably the worst.